Welcome back. We want to take a closer look now at a story we updated you on earlier this week.
It's something we have to watch. The World Organization for Animal Health says that vaccinating poultry should be on the table everywhere, and this has been disputed between a number of countries.
All right, that clip is from Brad's 3 Brilliant Minutes on Monday when he updated us on the latest on bird flu, which has been found in mammals, including about 9,000 sea mammals along the coast of Chile, sea lions, otters, dolphins, porpoises, and more. And to learn more, we're joined by Keith Polson. He is the director of the UW Veterinary Diagnostics Lab. They identified that bird flu outbreak that we reported on back in March of 2022. It was at a commercial farm near Whitewater. So, Keith, when we spoke about a year ago, commercial flocks being hit hard in the U.S., we talked about how to prevent it from spreading to other flocks. Well, now, as is in the news, it is spreading to mammals. What does that tell you about the virus?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and we've had a significant amount of concern about virus in the environment, because where the mammals are getting viral infection, they're dead-end hosts, so likely they're not spreading any virus, but they're getting it because they do what they do. They scavenge some of those birds that are sick and die, but we're seeing over 130 different species other than our wild birds coming through. The mesocarnivores that we see with bobcats, possum, dogs, cats, in very small numbers, and then our marine mammals that are still scavenging those birds that do die from influenza.
All right, so in Chile, there was a man who, they don't know how he caught it, but he did catch the avian flu. He resided in an area where there were a lot of those mammals. You called them dead-end hosts. What does that mean for us laymen?
Right. So typically what we talk about with a dead-end host, and it's very similar to people that we've seen 3 or 4 different cases in Ecuador and Thailand and now Chile, is that they can be infected. It's rare. It's exceedingly rare, but they don't propagate virus and they're not infectious to other people. That's what a dead-end host is, similar to horses with West Nile virus.
Okay. So, but as this virus mutates, and we were talking about on our program the other day, I likened it to COVID in that we kept seeing different strains of the virus. As the virus mutates, is there a concern? When is there the concern for us that it might jump from mammal to human?
Right. So there's always a concern for that. As viruses, especially influenza viruses, they change, and they're always changing, even throughout an outbreak. And we saw that with COVID. We definitely see that with influenza. And that's why we have such an in-depth infrastructure at the National Veterinary Services Laboratory and the other veterinary diagnostic laboratories around the state as part of the National Animal Health Laboratory Network. And we're isolating and sequencing those viruses, and we share all of that information. Now, what's the risk of something like the Spanish pandemic flu in the early part of the 20th century? It's low, but not zero, and that's why we watch it so closely. And we want to watch it as it moves between those species and what's making the virus move between the species, and then what then is the risk for human and other animal population health.
France has become the first country in the EU. They are going to vaccinate their commercial stock. That is ready to go. Vaccines are not new for this, right? Have they worked in other countries? And if not, why?
Yeah, so the vaccine debate globally is going to be, has always been at the forefront. There was just a recent meeting at the World Organization of Animal Health in France. When you start using a vaccine, it changes how you can trade. Egypt, China, Indonesia have used billions of doses of vaccines, but they weren't necessarily successsul. So if we are going to use a vaccine, which is a decision by USDA and our state animal health officials, is that we need to make sure it's done on an organized and a very quick basis because of the virus changes. That's why we have different seasonal flu vaccines. We have to do it very quickly. It has to be coordinated, and we need to know exactly how that will impact our wild and domestic populations. We know that in Egypt, China, and in Indonesia, it didn't work. And hopefully we can see France as a model about what's a judicious use of vaccine to make sure that we meet the wildlife and domestic population disease control measures to make sure we have a safe food supply and an abundant food supply. and then we're not impacting wildlife populations around the world.
All right, you mentioned the food source there. So my final question is this, and about vaccines, the USDA Research Service has begun trials. I think they began them back in April. UW Veterinary School of Medicine is also working on helping develop vaccines. Is there concern, though, Keith, or how much concern would there be as this virus has mutated and moved along, that it could circle back to commercial flocks here in the United States, here in the state of Wisconsin, because we have done a good job of limiting the damage of those commercial stocks, if you compare that to where we were a year ago in the spring?
Yeah, so we were fully anticipating seeing domestic and productum flocks being infected this spring, but it didn't happen. It shocked everyone. We did not see that in Wisconsin. We did see infections in Pennsylvania and other states. The outbreak from 2022, that's kind of the same strain that's moving through now. It was the worst foreign animal disease outbreak in history. So will that strain come back, or will a different circulating highly pathogenic strain from Europe or Asia or the Alaskan flyways, will that come back? It's very difficult to predict. So we do think that risk is low, but not zero. But that's why we continue to look to make sure that we maintain that's the supply chain for food, and that we're monitoring it in the wild and domestic populations.
Well, Keith, that means a lot more testing for you folks there at the Diagnostic Lab. We appreciate the time. Thanks much.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me.